I feel myself that there's a bit of difficulty in getting people together to work on projects. That that's my own particular feeling, that there are a few big projects, LaTeX one that stands out, and they genuinely speaking can get people. LaTeX and Tech Live seem to be fairly well placed for getting volunteers, but I feel as though the development and use of community resources is something that requires some thought. And I don't think it's something that can be solved with a centralized solution. It requires shared values, but not central authority. Or if it is an authority, it's an authority based upon respect and confidence, which I think the tech community had at the beginning with Don Knuth. Everybody had a great deal of respect and confidence in him. And I think there's probably other people there, but now I feel as though things are a bit weak at the moment.
I'm just wondering if that's maybe due to the fact that in the old days there was tech and there was LaTeX and that's it. And these days you've got CTech, LuaTeX, LaTeX 3, all of these different forks, if you like. And if you just want to use it, you've got to make a choice. Do I use PDF tag? Do I use something else? And if you want to sort of be more interested in it, I think the bar from moving from a user to someone maybe doing some input into development is that you've got several communities to choose from, and some of them have maybe different goals and so on. It's not as clear as it used to be. It's not even clear to me what the justification of all of these forks are, and some of them are no longer being developed. And then you've got this whole BibLaTeX stuff, which is an alternative to BibTeX and so on. And in the old days, I think it was pretty clear everyone worked on the same project, and now there are many different projects, if you like.
I don't know if that's a symptom or a cause or both. I suspect
there's certainly a correlation.
Yeah.
Well, the world has gotten more complicated, notably because of Unicode. The desire to support all of the world's writing systems in a single unified character set is an extremely important one. And tech by itself just couldn't do it, because it really has hardwired into it this notion of an 8-bit byte being an index into a character set table. And so that's where LuaTeX and CTech come along, CTech being the first to extend it and make it widely available. And for people who need that facility, typesetting Hebrew and Arabic and English and French all in the same document, where you've got multiple writing directions and complicated scripts like Arabic, you just can't do that with plain tech, and you can't do that with PDF tech either, because again, it just doesn't have the interface to the underlying machinery that handles the construction of words where characters get created from glyphs that are reshaped for that particular word. We don't have that concept in alphabetic languages, but Arabic certainly has it. And some of the Indian subcontinent languages, they don't do reshaping of the letters, but they do move them around. And that's another complication that we just don't see in the West. And then, of course, the other issue for Hans Hagen, who has a business, advanced document engineering in the Netherlands, he's producing typesetting services for a Dutch market that includes school textbooks from kindergarten through high school, plus legal documents for the state. And in particular for the school books, he felt very strongly that it really is critical to have artistic design in the textbooks. And he felt that plain text by itself was just too restrictive. And so he wanted a more flexible programming environment. And that's what led to this notion of having more of the algorithms that are currently hard-coded into the tech engine itself be rewritten in a scripting language, Lua, that you can modify on the fly for particular documents. And he's very adamant that context does not provide a bunch of standard style files for books and reports and articles. He feels that every document is worth, if it's worth writing, should be worth designing as well. And therefore you ought to sit down right at the beginning, say, what is my page size and what are the colors I'm going to use and the fonts and so on. And that's not what a lot of people in, say, science and engineering are used to thinking of. They want a cookbook in which they can fill in this experiment, we did the following, and have a description of methods and conclusions. And the papers come out looking much the same. So those are just different goals. But I think Hans's work is extremely important. It's not only Hans, Taco Hookwater as well, and the other people in the context community, because they're showing that with the ideas that tech has had about how you put together pages with words and lines and hyphenations and page breaks and line breaks and so on, you can go well beyond that with a more sophisticated engine, which is what LuaTeX has become. And for a long time, LuaTeX was essentially a set of changes to PlainTeX, but I think they've moved to a point now where it's a standalone system. Or if they haven't done that, it probably will become that.
Would it be unrealistic to hope for some successor which combines all of the goals into one size fits all?
I don't think so, because I think Don's goal was to have reproducibility over a long time period and over many platforms. So he was very careful in how tech was programmed. But when you introduce Unicode, you have this problem that I've raised before, that the three major Unicode rendering libraries. Actually, there's four now because I didn't count Harfbuzz. So there's Microsoft's, Apple's, IBM's, which is used in the Linux world, and now Harfbuzz, a new project that is supported in LaTeX 3. So you have four different rendering systems that will produce different output for the same input. And it's not clear whether we should all have a worldwide agreement on a common system, because Unicode isn't a fixed thing. Unicode is coming out in its 14th or 15th edition. There's a new edition every year or two. And typically most years they add 1 to 5,000 new glyphs and address more writing systems. And as I'm on the Unicode list and have been following it for more than 2 decades. There are lots of issues that come up about how you classify characters. Is this a letter? Is it a digit? Is it a consonant? Is it a vowel? And where do the hyphenation rules go into all of this? It's a very, very complicated problem. And if you just consider hyphenation, the British and the Americans and Canadians can't agree on word hyphenation for what is nominally a common language. German has gone through this situation with the new orthography that was introduced in the 90s that hasn't been universally agreed on, and Austria and Switzerland and Germany don't always agree either. For example, Switzerland doesn't use the SZ ligature, use a double S. And I read in the news recently, there are some German states that are withdrawing from at least parts of the standard orthography and going back to a style they felt was more familiar. And I'm sure this situation can be found repeated in many languages around the world.
Yeah.
It's very hard to get standardization. And it's not even a normal thing. I've just finished a fat book, which I can't show you here, but it's called The Stories, plural, of English by David Crystal. And it's essentially the story of how the English language developed from about 800 until the 20th century. And
you did show it a couple of weeks ago, right?
Pardon me?
You did show it a couple of weeks ago, right?
Okay, then I have shown it here. What he points out is that until the advent of dictionaries in the late 1700s, there was no agreement on spelling, and there wasn't even a notion of dialects. People realized that if you came from the north of England, you spoke differently from those in London and those in Cornwall and Devon. But it didn't bother people particularly. Those were just somewhat different languages that had a certain amount of mutual comprehensibility. But with the advent of dictionaries, this led to people thinking that perhaps there ought to be a standard system of spelling and a standardized grammar, because the grammar is also differed from different parts of the country. I mean, you may have noticed people from Yorkshire may use a plural verb with a singular pronoun. I were at the house. And so these are just local peculiarities, and language is always evolving. And that's another difficulty, that even if you try to lay down rules, as France has done with the academy, the French Academy, new words show up like hamburger, and it's difficult to decide, what do you do with these? Do you permit this foreign word into the language, or do you come up with your own invention? In the Scandinavian languages, for example, which I have some experience with since I lived in Denmark for a number of years. In Aarhus and Copenhagen, two cities with two computing centers, they had different vocabulary for computing terms. And Aarhus tended to borrow English words, and Copenhagen tended to use a Danish translation of the English word. In Iceland, they go back to Icelandic roots to come up with words for new things. And so their words in computing and chemistry and physics and so on are really quite different, and don't make themselves easily understood to other people from the rest of Europe. So what it boils down to is that it's very difficult to come up with any kind of standards which are going to be valid for any period of time. And that's true for language and grammar, and it's true for computer software. What we can hope to do with computer software, of course, is to keep it running. Because if we can keep it running and also licensed properly in the case where there were restrictive licenses on it, that we have some chance of obtaining fairly close results in the future. And so I've suggested that what publishers really need to do is to develop virtual machines, which are relatively easy to do now because they're all free and available on every platform, and simply set up their typesetting environment in that virtual machine. And now they can have confidence that this VM will continue to typeset the documents well into the future, no matter what the future operating systems are running on are.